also be announcing sometime today around 5:30 why Baylor's Dave Aranda is unlike any college football coach you know. Dave Wilson, who I have known for 3 decades, was the one who wrote the article and joins us on Sick 'Em 365 Radio and 365 Sports with Craig Smoak, Paul Catalina, and again, I'm David Smoak. Dave, thanks for your time. I told you this yesterday. What I like what you did is you took some things that had been mentioned before, but you didn't do the copy and paste. How much fun did you have, and how many people did you talk to do this article?
I would say the fun part is it was a little bit agonizing because Coach Aranda is such an interesting guy that you wanted to do it right, and so I think I ended up ultimately talking to about 15 people over the course of a few months. Some of those at Media Day, some of those at the Texas High School Coaches Convention, some of those, just on the phone. So it's definitely something that took an undertaking to try. So much has been written about some of the quirkier or more offbeat things. But, for our audience that doesn't follow Baylor every day, I thought it was worth it to give the bigger picture. And, a lot of times you get a place like this, you get one shot to do a good story. And so I wanted to make sure that we hit all the angles.
So did you go watch the very good but not as highly known Nicolas Cage film Pig after this? Because he has tons of different references where it comes to that or children's books.
Yeah, I have still not seen Pig. Don't tell Coach. But I did read The Velveteen Rabbit while I was reporting it, and was sort of struck by, oh man, I don't think I've read this book in 40 years, and I got it. So I understood that, and he had a few others. He went on and on about the movie Coda. He had a few others. I mean, I could have done a whole article just on deciphering his metaphors, but I don't know that any of us, every man could quite understand them as well as he can.
Dave, so how do you feel like he's been able to grow more comfortable over the last couple of years?
I think you just see it. I'll give you an example. This story is an example. I've asked for 2 years to do this story. Dave's told me in the past, I tell my team it's about them and not about me. So why would I want to do an article on me? And it's just, something that he didn't like the attention. I didn't put it in the story, but I tweeted it. One of my favorite things was after the Big 12 title game when one of the local guys asked him, your players were chanting, you'd like attention or something like that. And then they said, is that true? And before we could even finish the question, he said, no, just very quietly. But I do think he does not enjoy the attention. And I just think you see him much more comfortable in that role, getting up at a touchdown club and getting an award, or glad handing people at conventions. And, he's a guy that a lot of people look up to in the business. So he's having to, he's always been a guy that reached out to other people for help, and now he's the guy that people are reaching out to for input.
The first year, COVID year, it was a struggle. They were terrible, 2-7. He made some decisions pretty quickly. Do you find it interesting, Dave, that as much as he is such what seems to be a legitimately unique and very good person, that he's still not afraid to pull the trigger, make decisions on his coaching staff or a starting quarterback?
I find that completely interesting. I asked him that. I said, a lot of coaches, especially in their very first head coaching job, would be wary of making changes so quickly because it would look like that they made a mistake in the process. Did you have any issue with that? And he said, no, I had a vision for how I wanted this program to do it. And if the coaches, he told me he hired people for what they did rather than who they were. And that was his mistake. Now, it wasn't, I don't think he was taking personal shots. He was just saying, look, I hired people based on schemes or things. And instead of like walking the walk every day, that the way I want to do it, the way I want to treat players, the way I want to, talk to players, the way I want to run practice. And so if he definitely has a strong opinion on how his program should run, if the coaches don't like it, Dennis Johnson, the defensive line coach, who was really good in the story and very helpful. And he said, if you're a knower, you can't work for Coach Aranda. Like if you're a guy that thinks you have it figured out, you can't work for him. You have to be a learner. And I thought that was really interesting.
Dave Wilson, ESPN.com, wrote the article, and Dave Aranda with us, Sick 'Em 365 Radio, 365 Sports.
Dave, what do you think about, the offseason that we had in coaching where there were, these big jobs open, and David Aranda would have had easy kind of steps, especially to LSU and USC, into them, and obviously they went super big with guys who had more experience as head coach, but that he didn't budge and stayed here. What does that say about his personality from what you were able to glean?
Yeah, I don't have any knowledge of whether or not he was actually in the mix for those things. I do know that he did not pursue them. And a lot of times the way that works, obviously, is people behind the scenes and doing this. And I think it was just something that he said from the beginning, like, look, this is where, I don't think he says Baylor and all the things that make Baylor. Now, I would still worry, that there people are going to keep coming after him, and there's other places out there that are like a Baylor where the pressure's not as high, but there's resources and there's talent. But I don't think there's any question that this place at this time is the perfect fit for him. He recruits the type of players he recruits. He has a huge pool of prospects to pick from. He likes athletes and he likes speed, and he's centrally located in Texas. And at the same time, he's a very religious person. He believes in the mission of Baylor. I'll give you an example. He gave me one of his famous metaphors, right? I asked him, why Baylor? Why does Baylor mean so much to you? Why does it appeal to you? And he said, Baylor reminds me a lot of those old Polaroid cameras. He said, you take the picture, the film comes out, you look at it, you don't see the picture, but it needs sunlight to interact with the chemicals in the negative to come to fruition. And to me, that's what Baylor is.
How about
and
that?
It's so deep that I couldn't really figure out a way to squeeze it in there without having, the 15th different metaphor in the story. But it is fascinating, right? That's literally the way his brain works on everything, and it's super interesting.
Dave, how did you take him sitting by himself after the national championship? And you as you say it always means more, but how did you kind of take that part of the Aranda story of him not even being out there and celebrating like everybody normally would, but kind of even doing that in his own way?
So I'll tell you, that's what first drew me to him. I was at that game. I covered that game for ESPN. I was an editor at the time, so I was up in the box. I came downstairs to go to the press conferences to help out some of our reporters. And I went and posted up outside the locker room just to see the scene. And I'm standing there, and I don't know if you guys remember this, but it's the game where Odell Beckham was running around passing money out on the floor of the stadium and running in and out of the locker room. The players were smoking cigars in the locker room, and so the cops were running in and out, screaming at everybody that they were going to arrest them if they didn't put out their cigars. It was chaos, total chaos. And Ed Orgeron's hollering and screaming. Joe Burrow's walking out with a cigar in his mouth with so much, his swagger. Doors open, and it was almost like a wrestling entrance. The doors open, smoke comes pouring out. Here comes Dave Aranda, 3-piece black suit with a briefcase with his head down, and just walks through everybody and is gone. He just leaves. And I remember in my head at that one moment thinking, this is like that Sesame Street song that one of these things is doing its own thing. Mm-hmm. And I was like, that guy is interesting, and I want to know what his deal is. Mm-hmm. And so that's really the moment for me when I was like, that guy's so interesting. And then he got the Baylor job not long after that. And from the get-go, I was like, I want to come talk to you. And so I'm so thrilled to have actually gotten to do it and to be able to write the story.
How about Trey Novosad and his son, of course, Austin, committed to Baylor and then went on a tour to make sure, and Aranda was like, okay, but this is where you need to be. And it wasn't some coach just trying to be arrogant. It was he knows Austin. He knows what Baylor's like. But the quote from Novosad's father, if Coach Aranda is not there, we'd never go to Baylor. I mean, that's how important Aranda was. Everybody tells you don't pick the college because of the coach, because they always move around. But he told us, I've been to LSU. I've been to crazy places. I don't fit there. I didn't fit there. I fit here. They let me do weird stuff. I can be me, and I'm not going anywhere. I like it here. And he almost like basically told Austin, that's why you'll like it too.
So, yeah, that's what I thought was interesting is Austin grew up a diehard, an Aggie. I don't know. And to have the opportunity to possibly play there, I think Coach just said, like, look, Trey said that Austin is very similar temperamental-wise with Coach Aranda, just very low-key. Matter of fact, he told me a great story that when Trey called Coach to commit, that Trey is very much like Dave, and he's like, "Hey, Coach, I'd like to commit." And Coach was like, "Okay, that's great, I appreciate it." And Sean Bill was like, "What the hell's wrong with you guys? This is awesome! Somebody get excited here!" And so I think that's hilarious, and you can totally see it. But he's like, "Look, you and I have the same personality. I know you. You're going to go watch the way they coach at the other places, and then come back and watch the way we coach and see where you're more comfortable." And I think I know where that is.
So what you're telling us, I was going to go ahead.
No, go ahead.
So what you're telling us is that Dave Aranda and Jimbo Fisher have wildly different personalities.
I think they might. I mean, that would just be, from afar. But no, I think, and so I know that I think Trey probably got a little heat for the we would never go to Baylor part of that, and I don't think he meant it that way. I think he just meant given the late press, having a chance to go to Ohio State, having a chance a place that's turned out all these great quarterbacks, and where you grew up, like those are pretty enticing, and it came down to their faith in Coach Aranda, really.
How much did Dr. Jerry Lynch, who you mentioned, Aranda reached out to him, and is a guy that probably has a lot on his plate. In fact, he's doing stuff all the time with teams or whoever else. How much influence did Dr. Jerry Lynch have on Dave Aranda, and maybe even vice versa?
I think if you listen to Dr. Lynch speak, or you look up some of his stuff, or you read some of his books, and I have not read his books, but I've read a lot of his info, and then I did a Zoom for quite a long time, and you hear it. You hear it. So it's always about person over player. And he didn't say that explicitly as Dave always does, but he talks about human beings versus human doings. Like I've heard Coach Aranda talk about that. Dr. Lynch would say, Steph Curry is not who he is because of what he's doing. It's because of who he is as a being, as a person. And so I see that, I hear the echoes of that in Coach Aranda. So I think they've had a very strong kinship. If you go look at Dr. Lynch's books, the people who write the forward to these books are big names. And he asked Dave to write the forward for this one. So that's how much he thinks of him, and that's how much Dave thinks of him. I mean, Dr. Lynch has worked with Dean Smith. He worked with Phil Jackson. Steve Kerr is one of his proteges. He's like, people play for a guy like Steve Kerr, and they play for a guy like Dave Aranda not because they yell and scream at them, but because of what type of person they are. They respond. They want to win because the other person is such a good person that they want to win for them.
Thanks for your time, Dave. You did an incredible job. Now we're going to bore everybody to death and talk JUCO basketball. We're not going to do that. That's how you and I first met, covering East Texas junior college basketball. Remember those days at Masters Gym right. and Wagstaff Gym and elsewhere. You have been working at ESPN for a while. Is this one of your favorite stories to do? You said it was at times tough because there's so much to get in, but is this one of your favorites now that it's out?
It's tough because it was something like, and I'll be honest with you. I mean, I have two kids that are sort of neuroatypical. I have one son on the autism spectrum, one son with Tourette's and OCD, and it was important to me to write a story about somebody who does things in a different way. Now, I'm not diagnosing Coach Aranda with anything. That's not what I mean. What I mean is he's a different guy, not a yeller, screamer, different thing. It's important to me to show the spectrum of, in this world of college sports, that there are people that do things in different ways and can win in different ways, right? You've seen that at Baylor. I did not go to the point in the story to say Art Briles did it this way and Dave Aranda did it this way, because I don't even want to bring that up, although I just did. But to say that you can win and be different. And I think that is, he worked on that original Leach staff with Sonny Dykes and Dana Holgerson and Briles and all those guys. And, Sonny Dykes told me for the story, I didn't use it, but he's like, I think that was important for all of us to show that you can be yourself and be a college football coach. We didn't all have to try to be Lou Holtz. So that's why it was hard, because you just want to do it right. Is if the guy gives you the time and you wanted to do it for so long, you wanted to do it right and fully report it. And so much has been written about him, especially about his analytical mind and how he coaches. And I just kind of wanted to take a different tack and say, like, look, that's all been done. People have read that. We know he's a great coach. But what makes him want to coach? So that's kind of my point. But yeah, it's definitely my favorite, but it's one of the ones that I felt was most challenging just to get it right.
Yeah, he made the decision with Gary Bohannon back at the end of spring. There's the coaching changes that he can, like I've said, he can be a cold-blooded assassin in a way with decision-making, but that's not kind of who he is personally. But he knows when to make a tough decision. Yeah.
A perfect example. You know, I wrestled with whether or not we could. I mean, the story ended up being almost 4,000 words, which is longer than we normally would do for a single subject feature. And I could have gone on and on. You know, the Bohannon one, I can't think of another coach in the country this year that had a hotly contested quarterback race and that made the decision that early. So, you know, and like we heard Coach at Media Day say, you know, I have pictures of my kids with Gary in my house. Why wouldn't I want the best for him? And the Nova said, well, that factored in our opinion too. We saw that, you know, we saw how he treated his quarterbacks, and that means something to us.
Hey, Dave, great job, man. Thanks for your time. We appreciate you being a part of it today.
Thanks, guys.
Dave Wilson. In fact, a couple of comments, biscuits and gravy. I just put the